everyone. Welcome to Changing Gamedev Life, a podcast where we interview folks working in the game industry and ask them how they got there, who helped them along the way. We focus on interviewing people who may break the historical mold of who is in games.
This podcast is for anyone who is interested in the soft and squishy human parts of getting into games work and how to make it better.
I'm Pejman. I'm a professor at Ontario Tech University. I study games and user experience.
And I'm Jen. I'm a sociologist at the University of Waterloo's Game Institute. I mostly work with game devs and aspiring devs to understand who gets to make games as a career and why people leave it. Today, our guest with us is Alex Orlando. And we wanted to talk to them because Alex is the community manager for Kitfox Games. Kitfox is a developer and publisher in Montreal. And we haven't talked to a community manager yet. Alex is responsible for some huge portfolios, including Boyfriend Dungeon and Dwarf Fortress, which you might have heard of. At different times, Alex has also been involved in esports management. They've been an editor-in-chief for a middle state games publication, First Person Scholar. They've been a streamer and a YouTuber, as well as just doing a PhD in English along the side. And so this was like a really windy road. And so I totally want to hear about it. Can you tell us your origin story? Like, how did you get from there to here?
I feel like you just verbalizing the journey just made me have a mini, oh my God, just freak out there because it is wild as you put it. But I would say my journey started off when I was just a little lad walking around. My dad owned a video store in the 90s, which means I grew up around video games basically. They were there. I remember just on weekends, my dad would sometimes babysit while he was working. And so he would just set me up with any console and any game I wanted in the back room and like just play. So I was playing games. I've always had access to games ever since I can remember. And I just feel like that's just been the one constant in my life is just I've always wanted to play games. I've always looked at the industry. I remember my dad used to take trips to E3 back in the day when it was like the thing to do and the only way like anyone got any sense of what was happening. And that was always one of my dreams was to go to E3, but that's never going to happen now because it's gone now, but that's okay. I've been to many other things like it that I think are satiated that dream. But when I was always in school, like I always thought, oh, this is something I can't get into because I was always bad at math. I didn't even attempt to do any like physics or science or even like computer programming, even though it was offered at my high school. And I was very computer savvy. Like we always had a computer in the home, a family computer. But I always just thought that's not for me. Like it was only guys in the class. Like it was just very, this isn't for me. It's too much like math or something. I just never thought that the games industry would be something career-wise that I could ever get into. I thought it would just be a forever hobby, which I was fine with. But then as I was like going into university and I pursued an English degree, like Jen was saying, I kept eventually wanting to write about games or include them in some way in my scholarship when I got to the master's PhD level. And so I thought, okay, this is never going to escape me. Let's start seeing like what I could do. And at first, like I thought I wanted to stay in teaching because I could see that there was people who were in games research that were in academia. And I was like, that's this really cool field. And like, it was pretty new at the time, kind of just, it was been around, but like, it seemed like the new exciting thing. So I pursued that. And that's how I met Jen. And I met a lot of cool, smart games people and a lot of women actually that worked in games as well. And so that was very inspiring. And it gave me the motivation to think, hey, I think maybe I can work in games to some extent. And on the side, yeah, I was volunteering in esports stuff because that was just a way that I thought that I could build up some experience outside of the classroom. And I was always really interested in competitive gaming. So I did a little bit of volunteering and a little bit of work there. And then when I was in school, I started my streaming because my PhD project ended up being related to streaming. So I thought I have to stream myself to understand. And that actually was like my main bridge, I would say, from like where I am at Kitfox is going from school, realizing that the school path wasn't for me and going into streaming and YouTubing full time and just crash coursing my way through learning how to do like video editing and all that kind of stuff, photo editing. And then eventually, yeah, that's where I am now at Kitfox. And I've been there for over 3 years now, launched a few games and learned a lot, traveled many different places, been to many different conventions. I've given some talks as well. So I'm still in that academic world sometimes. But yeah, that's, I guess, the journey. That's laying it out there.
Before I forget, you've been a speaker at GDC, the Game Developers Conference, which is basically now our E3 if you are a game developer, right? Like it's big and up there. So how does your dad feel about that? Now his daughter is not only going to these type of conventions, but they are a rock star speaker at these type of conventions.
I think my parents have always been so proud of me that I've been just able to find something that makes me so happy. And I just tell them all the time, I'm living my dream job right now. And they remember the days when they'd be the first person to say, oh, this is just a phase. This is just what you do for fun. Because obviously back in the day, I don't think community management was even like a career path that you could do. And like when you did your like career cruising in high school or whatever, it'd be like, no, like nothing like this even existed. So they could have never imagined that I would be able to get something like this. So I'm sure they're very proud. They're very supportive.
So you open this up into this huge segue because a community manager hasn't been a career path for very long, right? There have been community managers or people who are mods, but most of the time these are people who are people from the community who are doing this work for free. And there's not like a professionalization around community management yet, or most people don't even know what the heck it looks like, right? And so can you tell me about what is community management? What does your work look like? What's its role in the game industry?
Yeah, and I would say like the role of the community management varies from like job to job and person to person. Like I especially at GDC, I got to meet a lot of community managers and we have a lot of like universal experiences. Things like managing social media, managing communities that exist on Discord or fora, and also just like getting a sense of what the community thinks about your game, just general reception, sometimes like what the press thinks, but also just staying constantly in tune with what the conversations are within the industry, like being able to respond really quickly on social media or with your community in some way, getting a sense of what other games are out there, what other games are your players playing, just understanding the whole ecosystem. And it's really like bringing that back to the team who is generally like less online than I think a lot of people realize. Like game devs are nerds, but they are not terminally online like all of us are. Because like I'll say something and they're like, "Oh, I didn't hear about that." It's like, yeah, of course, because it's not your job to be constantly online, and they can be very focused at times. So it's about bringing that back to the team in a way that is digestible and productive for the games we're making. So feedback that is good and helpful and not the mean stuff, and really shielding them and protecting them from that mean stuff because they're going to see it anyways. A lot of devs love to just check online, poke their head in to see what's going on, but it's not good for their health and they shouldn't do it all the time, which is why we're there to manage that for them. But a lot of what I do is also like very marketing heavy. So I make a lot of assets related to just like the game. Like I can't tell you how many times you need to rejig a cover art for a game because this website needs it on this format. Steam needs like at least 10 or whatever different formats. And then if you're applying to an award show or a press conference where your like game is being displayed, they need specific formats for things. So you'd be surprised how much like just like in Photoshop I'm moving logos around too. So it's like marketing material. It's thinking of events that are in-person events as well as online events. A lot of what I do is also related to the published games that we do, which is pretty unique. Not every game dev studio. Kitfox is a game dev studio that does publishing also, which is not as common. So I have to work with those devs and figure out like what they want to do in relation to marketing for their game, and which can be different for each team. So yeah, a lot of it is communication amongst team members and not even related to the community at all, really. It spirals out of control, which is I think why a lot of community managers are like very burnt out all the time and only stay on their job for so long and then move on to something else.
That's super interesting. Alex, I wanted to ask you, kind of maybe going back a little bit, when you were talking about how you got into doing game work. So you mentioned that as you were growing up, you didn't feel that game industry might be something that you would want to work in or contribute to. But now we hear that you're doing so well. So I want to know, what was that kind of moment that you felt that, okay, this might be something that looked like a career for you? What happened? When did you feel that you belong? And the reason I'm asking, because I would think many of our audience would have that question on wondering if this is the industry that they can join. So I want to hear a little bit more from your perspective on what happened, what changed that feeling for you.
So there's a few stages to that. I think the first stage was realizing that other people work in games besides programmers, which I think is not as pervasive as it used to be, but I still feel like a lot of people think like that if you're not directly like coding, you're not involved in the industry. And some people even consider even artists as not real devs, which is I don't know why the lines are drawn that way. So I think that takes some like adjusting. The other thing too is like actually going in and looking at real job postings and seeing who's actually hiring. I distinctly remember first seeing like esports jobs show up at Blizzard, and I thought that blew my mind, because I was like, how is a person getting a job with esports and like an industry that is mostly volunteer run, like across the board? How are people getting paid to do this? And then looking at the qualifications and realizing like, oh, I don't need programming to do that, or there's lots of marketing stuff too. And that clicked as well, where you have to actually see, okay, these are the actual jobs that are out there that I could theoretically do. Even if I may not have had all the experience at the time, it was something like, okay, this isn't math, this isn't science related, this isn't even, you don't need a business degree for these things, that kind of thing. That helped a lot. And then by the time I start to understand that there's this content creator realm where I could do almost like a pre-community manager job, where I'm managing like my own community that I created and taking it like my own pace, and realizing like I can teach myself Photoshop and things like that. These are things you just learn through experience. And so that was like a nice way of just like practicing the role in my own sort of creative way. So at that point, I was like, okay, I have enough experience now that I could actually start applying to these jobs. And I have a portfolio of like streams I've done, graphics I've made, or things like that that I can actually show.
That's super cool. Did you have any like a mentor along the way or role model that you try to follow?
I looked up to a lot of academics who bridged the gap in that space. Austin Walker for sure was one of them, who was in academia and known as a really good academic that like started in games writing. I also did a little bit of that as well, like just freelance wrote a little bit. And now he's RIP Possibility Space, but he was involved in an actual game studio as well. And he's doing a bunch of other projects now, so he's not in that world anymore necessarily completely. But it was really cool to see people with academic experience respected in the gaming industry, and that their knowledge was valuable from like theory and the kind of experience they got from that. And also that people wanted to read articles like that too. And obviously I didn't end up going like into the writing realm, but I can think of Lee Alexander did work in games too and was a writer, and just seeing how you didn't have to also like start from scratch too, like that work and experience was recognized and valuable. And yeah, I would say I don't think there was many people that could help me with the direct path, because it was like I was all over the place and I didn't even know what I wanted at the time. But it was like also knowing eventually that, yeah, maybe like I'm not best suited for the academic side of things, and that just wasn't for me. And seeing other people do it in that way and being like, that's awesome, but also maybe that's not what I want to do.
So how do you figure out or find the mentorship and support as a community manager if there isn't necessarily that developed understanding of what that role looks like? Where do you go? What resources do you use? Who's been really helpful in that direction?
Yeah, that's really tricky, because unlike a lot of organizations, like I'm thinking of the Pixels or Dames Making Games, where it is very focused on like, you want to make a game, or you can like, you want to get into game production that way. It's like harder to jump in and be like, oh, I'm just here for the marketing or whatever. Not to say that there's aren't people that can't help. It was just always so intimidating for me to look into that. But I was thinking about this because there are some like superstar community managers, like obviously Victoria Tran is a name that gets pulled around a lot, because she does publish her own findings and articles and things like that. And she has publicly available resources for community managers. But that's just because she is a superstar. And I don't even say superstar, but it's like a lot of that labor is done on top of all this other labor she's already doing. So it's really a kindness to put it out there, but also recognizing that not everyone has necessarily the time or resources to do like work on top of work on top of work. But it's just out of the kindness of people's hearts where they take the time to actually write about these things. So Victoria Tran is definitely a person that has those publicly out there. And I know a lot of community managers, literally, if you just DM them on like Twitter or something, they will answer too. But again, they're also busy and they're also dealing with a bunch of different DMs at any moment. It is really challenging. And I never really found a strict mentor that's, hi, I'll take you under my wing. I think that's very rare to find. And so, it's really hard for me to recommend one thing or the other, because I think you may get lucky if you go to some sort of game industry event and you run into some community managers or marketers. But I also find those are the people that tend not to attend those events because they're so busy and overwhelmed. And not to say that not everyone is, but I think that there's more an understanding that, like, oh, there will be a programmer at this thing. There probably will be some sort of artist that can talk to you about what tools they use and what's going on or whatever. It's just harder to find. We're all online. We're all in our like little bubble.
Yeah, and I think of seeing talks at GDC about community management and some of the things about like how to do it and avoid these mistakes. But
and there's very few of those.
Yeah, and some of them are filtered, right? You're not going to really lay it all down when you know it's going to be recorded and everywhere. But also, if you're a community manager at these sort of events, you don't have time. You're actually doing the community management around your game too, as well. I am curious. I always conceptualize as a community manager as a filter, right? They're like filtering the information that comes from the game devs, like the studio, about the games that they're making and what they're working on. And they filter it and package it to go to the player communities. And on the flip side, they're filtering the information that comes from all different types of player communities, right? Like your traditional players, your influencers, your maybe new people that you want to play your game, your press sort of stuff maybe. And they're taking all that information and filtering back the bits and pieces that your game studio needs to know. How do you survive that filtering work? Because it seems like sometimes it's information overload, like on so many different platforms, and not all the information is positive.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And I think that I call it taking psychic damage when you just get too much of that. Just because especially if you're really, like the Steam forums, for example, they can be like pretty hostile, I would say. Like in ranking, maybe Kiwi Farms 4chan are up here, and then like Steam forums are like the next one down. And I think it's just preparing yourself mentally, but also realizing that it's not the thing I'm doing all day. I won't scrub through the Steam forums all day. I'll maybe take an hour in the morning, read them over, get a sense of things, and then I have to close it. I can't keep up with the conversations. And I think it's just being really strategic about how much you're looking at those things. If it is like really hostile, maybe break up that task into over several days. If it's an emergency, it's an emergency and you have to respond then and there. Thankfully, we haven't had too many of those. I'm lucky that we don't have that sort of, we don't do any live service games where there is constantly updates every week, not Caves of Cut updates every week, which is great. But also that is a very small community and they're very mostly positive. But for someone that does the large amounts of feedback every day for weekly updates, that's really challenging. And I don't think they do very well. I don't think there's any strategy to that I know of. I just hope that there's enough members on that team where it's not just one person taking all that. But I have a feeling that this is why community managers burn out really fast, is because they're on these games and teams and they just get put through the ringer. And sometimes the other thing I was going to say is like sometimes there's community managers who are superstars, but most of the reason you know about a community manager is because they're being harassed. And famously, the Destiny 2 community manager, more famously, was like written about because people were being so hostile to her, and then she got fired. And then I think Destiny 2 won the Game Award that year for Best Ongoing Community or something like that. So it was just like, that's a perfect example of just how these things go, where you can be the best, a superstar, super well known in the industry, and you're not being supported by your devs. They just, like, you have to still filter it and take it, and that's just like no support. Luckily, I feel very supported in my job because I think we're just aware that it's a super damaging, unhealthy practice, but unnecessary part of our job. So it's do it with care. Yeah.
I was actually going to ask you on the same topic because I know Tanya is very vocal about how to topics related to making game industry better. I think she talks about crunch. She gave a keynote at Kai Play this year about game culture. So I wanted to know, because you talk with so much joy about your role and Kitfox. So I wanted to hear your experience as a member of the game dev community. How does your day-to-day job look like? How is your day usually? And you mentioned that you feel supported. And as I said, you sound very happy about your work. So I want to know, how does that look like? Why do you feel so supported? And the lens would be like, what can others do in the industry to create the same same culture, same feeling for people who work in the studios.
Pejman is actually saying, tell me about your workplace policies.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Like, number one, I'll say right off the bat, Kitfox is a 4-day studio. So we do not work on Fridays. And Tanya just did a really good GDC talk on that, which I hope you'll get to see and we can share that, because it's an ongoing experiment, but she's a big proponent of that because that extra day is huge. And it's a little tricky with my role, I will say, because community doesn't sleep on the weekend and they sure as hell don't sleep on Fridays. And a lot of times the game industry has things that happen on weekends, Fridays and whatever, and I gotta be there. It's fine. But for the most part, I'm usually Friday is off. I get an extra whole day to recover, and that alone does wonders for everything. I just feel way more rested on a weekend. I can actually be productive if I have errands to do, but then also have time to relax and maybe play a game, which is also a big part of what she talks about, the media diet. And when you're in games, it's important to still play games for fun sometimes, and we rarely have a chance to, and that makes, I think, us less inspired to make better games if we're not consuming. If your media diet is trash and all you're watching is reality TV or whatever, which is, I'm guilty of that, but it reflects in your creative output. Number one, that's great. We also have a sliding pay scale, and that means that I think that, from what I understand, that we get raises not based on our ranking or role, but just how long we've been at the company. And so that's really nice. There's less hierarchy in that way. It just in general we run where anyone can sit on any meeting they want to if they have input. If we're in the middle of pre-production of a game and we're not even marketing yet, I've still sat on those meetings to just understand what stage the game is at, what the inspirations are in this early stage, and that's helped me a lot in the future when it comes to marketing that game. So it is very beneficial to me, and it also makes me feel like I'm part of the team, and it makes me feel like I'm contributing something to the actual game making process. Not to say that marketing isn't a part of game making, but my decision, my input, or if I have a feedback about something, even if I'm not a programmer or an artist, that opinion is fully accepted. So I do feel like a real member of the team. And in many cases, community managers don't get to go into those meetings, or their opinions aren't allowed to be shared, or they're like siloed off into a different room where they're by themselves with the marketers or whatever. So I think that makes me feel great. I'm very supportive in the sense that I can go to Tanya because we work directly with each other, and she's like the main person I go to. Or like any emotional concern, any personal concern, she's open to it. She's really flexible when it comes to taking time off if I need it. Just being like a human. It's totally cool at Kitfox if you have a doctor's appointment in the middle of the day that you have to go to, we can make up that time later. Or if we want to take the Friday and use it to catch up on work, we totally can. So it means that like I can live my life and not have to worry about taking a whole day off work because I have a doctor's appointment that takes an hour or two or so. And I think that just goes a long way. Just lots of flexibility and understanding in general. And there isn't these hard, fast rules about it has to be done this way all the time, 100%. And I don't know how necessarily those things can be easily replicated at bigger studios, which is like how you can fight for that. But unionization is obviously being pushed very hard right now. Not hard, but I would say there's a growing interest in it, especially within Quebec. Montreal Game Workers, I think, just is like partnering with another organization to really try and encouraging studios to actually look at unionization, especially the Ubisofts of the world and the EAs of the world and all the offices that are. And a lot of times, like the game devs date each other from other studios, so we hear about like the things going on at the other studios, like at Ubisoft, for example, and you just hear about how they're treated, and it's just terrible. It's like the worst, and it almost feels like two different worlds, and you almost feel guilty because it's so bad in some places, and we really do have it in a world that I think a lot of people would love to see. Workplaces in general, just people want to be treated like humans and they don't want to be laid off. We are very fiscally conservative at Kitfox. Like we're not spending a ton of money. Like job protection is like the number one priority at Kitfox. So especially right now when there's a new layoff every week, a new studio's closing or whatever, it's so important to feel like secure in your role. Things can happen, of course. Something could happen, but we are trying to be as safe about that as possible and not having people worrying about whether they're losing their job at the end of a project, which again is so important because you're losing your institutional knowledge when you lose someone, and just everyone is super important on the team. So we're treated like that, and that's really great. Unionization can address some of those things. I don't think it can address all of them. You can't force someone to be a human just because there's a union in place, but you can at least give yourself a little bit more protection. So that's always a number one recommendation I have for people that are in studios that just want to fight for more is consider union. There's a lot of resources that can actually help, I think, with that, just consulting and figuring out the early steps and things like that. But and until we get more people like Tanya working in the games industry, that's really hard to teach. You have to have actual humans who are running these things and not like these CEOs and these embracer like companies that just come in and just hire and fire willy-nilly, and it's just it's tough. And the only thing we can do is support indies and making sure more studios aren't closing and making cool games and supporting people who know how to make really cool games. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing.
I'm curious about the flip side of that. Like, having a really supportive workplace structure is so important. But at the same point, doing the type of work that you do, people in similar roles get to burn out really quickly just because of the nature of the work itself, even when they're in really good workplaces. So is there something that can be done more broadly in the game industry or by platforms such as Steam? Particularly, I'm thinking here in regards to gamer harassment aimed at developers, aimed at community managers, that sort of stuff. Like, how do we address that part of the equation?
Yeah, you're right, because the nature of the job won't change depending. Gamers are gonna gamer. I think it's odd that anytime you put a game on Steam, it automatically has to have a forum attached to it. I think that's very strange and maybe a little outdated at this point. If a developer doesn't want the forums on Steam's, they should be able to just shut that off, in my opinion. Steam support can still support if there's like a technical issue or there's something related to the financing of it all. But like, I don't think that you should just be at the mercy at whoever buys your game or whoever goes to the forums can immediately just start like abusing you just because they bought it. And I think you do see that in the tone of Steam comments specifically are about, I purchased this, therefore I expect this and this. And everyone has a different expectation of what exactly that is. Weekly updates versus this needs to be fixed now, or why hasn't there any DLC? I expect more. Why is this still in early access? Why is this in beta? Why? There's like all these things that relate to the like actual price tag of the game. Or even sometimes not even price tag. It's literally just I spent X amount of hours in this free to play game and I expect this and this. So it's a lot of that feedback is not very helpful. Sometimes it is. And sometimes it exacerbates my fears about what the actual community thinks about things. If the Steam forums are really bad, I'm going to think, oh, we messed up. But then you have to remember, actually, there's like all these other people here and here that are saying completely different things. And I don't know if that's just because the Steam forums are really accessible and they know the devs are watching so that they can abuse it in that way. But I don't understand why that's the case. And even then, the Steam tools for moderating are hit and miss sometimes. There'll be times where I'm like, I'll ban someone and it didn't just go through. It just doesn't work sometimes. And there's very rare times that you actually get Steam support helping in relation to moderating of the forums as well. Like occasionally, if something is reported, maybe a Steam staff member actually will go in and fix that. But I think that you have to be a fairly big game with a launch nearby. Like I remember when Dwarf Fortress launched, Steam would say, yeah, we'll have a few extra moderators on site watching things and whatever. But that shouldn't be the case just because we're launching a game and we're notable and because we have a lot of wish lists. It's really dependent on how well your Steam rep. Do you even have a Steam rep? Because many people don't. Your experience may vary depending on who you are, which is scummy, and I don't like that either. Especially because Steam takes such a large cut of game sales, right? I think it's 30%, right? Like it's quite a lot, and we're at the mercy of that. But at the very least, make it optional. The forums, I think. Maybe there has to be some form of communication between the player and the dev, maybe like an email address, but I think that's wild. I don't know why it's not an option to turn it off.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had never thought before. I understood intuitively that different platforms for different player communities of the same game have like markedly different atmospheres and vibes and feedback and want really different things. And so like you attend to is one thing, but not having the ability to say, I don't want to have to tune into the player community on this platform because it is
Right.
toxic and it's not useful for me doing my job at making the game better for all the majority of players out here. The fact that a developer can't actually turn that off and not listen to it is that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Something new.
The Steam backend is very interesting. Once you see it all in working, it's really wow. Like, how has this been the standard? It's quite incredible.
I want to know whether you recommend others follow your path?
100% yes, because I think it's really awesome to do a bunch of different things if you can and not be afraid to try something, realize it's not for you. I don't want to say fail because nothing's really failing because you really don't know what you want until you actually do it and then you realize that it's awesome. So, would I say that you need a degree, a specific kind of degree to be like respected or recognized in a specific industry? No, like I don't think you need to pursue all sorts of education, every kind of degree to be respected or recognized. I think that more and more we're seeing that it's your other kinds of experience along the way that make more of a difference than a degree. I think that's very old school thinking now these days, anyways. But then also just realizing that no matter how outside of the skill set you think that you may have, you can find a place in an industry that you really want to be in. And it's sometimes really difficult, but I always think you should try if it's your passion. It clearly doesn't go away no matter how hard you try sometimes. No matter how many times you tell yourself, this isn't for you, you can't do it, there's no opportunities. It will come if you just keep putting yourself out there. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but I truly believe that don't count yourself out of a role just because of what you think you are, that you can't build towards something. It's like it's out there. And most of the times, if the job's not out there, it just hasn't been like invented yet. There will be jobs get invented. I think that's the other thing you have to realize. If you're in like high school or like even undergrad or something like that, the job you have may not even be invented yet by the time it comes out. So like you never know where you're going to end up.
Meanwhile, students in high school are worried about jobs being uninvented by new tools and technologies that will take over their role for them.
I sympathize. I don't know. I would be so anxious like them too. I just be like, oh my god, I don't know. I'm uncertain about all future. It's a tricky one. I think we see a lot of that now, like especially at GDC. A lot of those booths were like some sort of AI technology or things like that. But the year before that, it was blockchain and crypto. So things and that's gone now. You never really know. And hopefully, if we keep making fun of it and keep talking about how it's bad and protecting ourselves using something like if you're an artist using Nightshade, protect your work while you can before it gets out of control. But also, yeah, we don't do any of that AI stuff. I know a lot of like big companies are pushing for it, and we only hope that the results are so bad that they just stop. It's not great. And the products that I've seen so far are not great either. Everything I tried at the GDC floor was buggy. It didn't work. It looked bad. It wasn't funny. Yeah, so try not to worry, but you never know. It's not great. But it'll never be great, right? That's the thing. If you think it's bad, it'll be always bad in some other way later too. So don't let that dissuade you either. Follow your dreams no matter what, because if the world collapses and you're not following your dreams, then at least you tried. Like instead of just like settling for something horrible, like that if it's going to be that bad anyway.
I was just thinking like the nature of your work in terms of being this like mobile filter or this really adaptable filter between different player communities and following conversations on multiple platforms, but also figuring out what's important from there and distilling it. Is there such a human touch involved in that and interpreting that, and how different tones and ways of speaking and slang are different on every single platform and community, and being able to figure what that is and interpret that is like the community management job. You're always going to need a human trying to.
I don't see how you could automate that. I would like to see a robot try, but like I can only imagine if you took like the Steam comments and filtered them through an AI and interpret what they're saying, like it would break. It would go on fire. Like that's like what my brain does too. But it would never work. There's no way. People, for better or for worse, love speaking to a human about their problems, and a chatbot or anything like that, or like whatever they're doing, virtual girlfriend, is not going to happen. It can't work because there's so much nuance to just like what is being said through typing, even just, and there's so much context missing from just if you're just reading it. I'm still learning about the community. There's still things that I don't understand about Dwarf Fortress and Caves of Cud, and I'll never learn all of it. It's impossible. And I just responding to that, and also responding in a way that in kind, and knowing what my devs are like, knowing what my team members are like personally also changes how I give feedback. So like the feedback I give to one of the artists that I know is this way, I'm going to say this, and then another artist might feel anxious if I reported that kind of stuff to them. It's personalized feedback to that person too. So it goes kind of both ways.
I have a question, might be a slightly off topic, but I'm very curious to know, because a lot of things as I understood from your work, is to listen to the community, digest their feedback, and come up with insights and give them to developer, which sounds very similar to what I do as a UX researcher. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. How would you, I don't know, differentiate between things such as internal playtesting, where you bring players in for particular aspect of the game, and what sort of advantages or benefits from that process, versus where we have a game feedback on a Steam forum, or people just like maybe write about the game on social media? Like, I don't know if you had experience with playtesting, and have you like worked on that area as well? And how do you differentiate, or where are the similarities between the two? That's mostly, I think, for my own learning, but our audience may also find it useful.
That's a really good question. My immediate thought went, I feel like community members, a lot of the community management stuff is figuring out if they're lying or if they're like not actually in good faith about their feedback. Even something like this happened or whatever, and I feel this way. I'm like, is that true? I do wonder if that happens with UX though and playtesting, where feedback they give maybe is just misinformed because they're not understanding like what they're experiencing in terms of a playtest. I do have experience with the playtesting, but our playtests are always invite only. So we don't have an open playtest for games. We haven't yet, and not to say that we won't in the future, but I think that helps with the sort of kinds of feedback we get because we know we already trust them. They signed up for this so that they already know that they're in this specific role evaluating a game in a certain way. That being said, I guess when we're in like beta testing, that kind of feedback comes through a lot too, where if we're in a beta test, an open beta test like we're doing with Dwarf Fortress right now, that is very strange because I think people just have different expectations about the state of the game when they hear beta. When it's like a prototype, maybe it's a little bit of a different story where this is very explicitly a prototype. This is very specifically not a product on Steam. As soon as you start getting into the early access beta, but it's on Steam, maybe you don't even have to buy it, but just the standard that comes with it is on Steam and therefore it should be at least this way because it followed the Steam rules of being a product on Steam. So I guess like it's that commercial element that's missing, right, from like a UX element where they're not customers, they're helping you and they're play testers. So I guess it really depends on like how you go about getting those testers, because every time you say this is open, you paid for it, but you're also testing and I want feedback, looks very different than you are invited to a closed play test where this is your role. This is what we're looking for specifically. Here's the bug report form. Go ham. Yeah. So I think that's the big difference.
That's really interesting, that the way you distinguish them from customer and someone who is actually helping you to make your game better. I think that's such a cool angle. I may reach out to you to write the article together on that.
Okay, I'll get back into the article right.
There's also, though, to me, I think the difference between UX and games user research is that the goal is to have actionable feedback to improve your game, right? In some of many dimensions, right? That is going to the developers. And so that's part of community management. But community management is also generating feedback to go in the other direction to generate and grow and bond the community, to build excitement and cohesion and stuff like that. And so the community manager is like going in two different directions, whereas the information flow for you is going just in one direction. So like maybe there's an umbrella or like that UX can be a part of community management.
That's super cool.
Yeah. There's so many. This is so fascinating because this is like such a career path that is still being beaten into like the freshly beaten snow, right? That your role has so many dimensions in it. Partly business, partly the communication, moderation sort of aspects, a lot of like content creation and marketing sort of thing. It's super fascinating to me.
I don't get bored, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I'm curious about, you talk about community managers leaving. So where do their careers go after community management?
Funnily enough, I see a lot of people still doing community management, but just not in the games industry. So I've actually seen 2 community people, including the one from Destiny, are now in film. So I think one is on Amazon working on the Fallout show. And then I think another one's at Netflix or some other streaming service. I don't remember. So like they're still doing community and marketing. It's just in a completely different industry. And I would love to pick their brains a little bit more about what that's like. I got to talk to Victoria a little bit at GDC because she's working with television studio now because they're doing like the Among Us TV series. I'm like, how did you get Elijah Wood? Like, I need to know all these things. And she was just, it's like totally different and like way less casual and very serious. And you're dealing with a lot of agents and it's just like over the top. So I think that's actually a challenge just because the games industry is very casual in terms of just business industries. So I'm sure there's like a lot of adjusting that needs to happen there. I think a lot of people do just straight up leave the games industry as well, just because of the toxicity and just the nature of it. And that alone is, I'll do marketing, but not here and not to you. And I don't want to listen to you anymore. And I'm sure like it's not necessarily like other industries aren't just as bad, but I don't know if they are. I also don't know. When it comes to like safety level issues, I've never heard of anything like this happening in any other kind of industry. Like maybe in sports, there's some people involved in sports that probably get harassed in some way, like from the fans. But I still think that there's lots of community managers in the way of those people and they're shielded from that in other ways. So, but never, it's not like the community managers specifically are being targeted or like the marketing people are being targeted. So I'm sure it's better in other places. And I also know community managers that move into different positions that aren't marketing at all. Like the community manager for Ponkel, who does Vampire Survivors, she just announced that she's now like a junior level designer at Ponkel. Same company, but different role. So I found that very interesting too, because I think because community managers have to do so many things that like they are inevitably getting experience in other roles while they're doing their job, especially if you're in like an indie studio where you can jump in and do voice acting or do whatever's needed. Like, oh, we need someone to film this thing or we need someone to do a quick voice line. Like you're there and like you're doing it. So I think it gives them an opportunity to explore other roles too.
Do you think that games nowadays, any new game release can survive, even if they don't have a dedicated community manager, without somebody filling those roles and those tasks and those skill sets?
Yeah, I really don't think so. When we talk to potential published games and we hear about what they're currently doing, because a lot of what we offer is like the social support, the marketing, because it's like the one element you'll have a superstar dev that's making this really cool game. We publish mostly games that are like 1 to 2 person teams, like very small. And it is the lead dev doing like the community management, who's reading the forums every day, who's like doing it all. And then like they just don't have time to work on their game. So what happens is the game's out, maybe it's an early access, maybe it's whatever, and they're not working on it because they're so busy doing all these other things that updates just become slow. People forget about the game, even if it's like a really awesome game. Like the game itself is really cool. Maybe even people have heard of it before, like a Caves of Cut, been known for years, but hasn't been actually like heavily marketed towards an audience. And now they're doing much better, and like people are hearing about it. And it's like you could make the coolest game ever, but like getting someone to like actually pick up the controller and playing or whatever, or buying it is like a huge step. And so like you're not gonna get someone actually playing the game until they actually hear about it and also know that it's worth their time and money like to invest into. So whether it's hearing about it, hearing their friends talk about it, like some level of marketing needs to go into that decision. And like the situation with the games are quite dire right now financially. So we're losing projects by the day. And so you need people buying your game to keep going. It's just, I don't think there's just too many games out there to just come out with a really cool indie game now and everyone plays it. Everyone plays the same game. It's just we're not at that stage anymore. The choice is endless and you just have to show the people the game. And then people are most of the time like, I didn't even know this existed. This is like the perfect game for me. It's like boy, we hear that all the time with Boyfriend Dungeon. It's a dating sim dungeon crawler and there's queer people and it's so sexy. And people are like, this is exactly what I wanted for all this time. And it's like, how would you know to find that unless you had someone show you? Like, how do you find it?
And so much about the game industry now is about developing communities that last long tail, right? It's not just about playing the game. You're going to follow that game studio or stay playing that game, not just because of the content or the things that the studio made, but the other people you talk about the game with, the meta game, the discussions on the forum, and building that and nurturing that and growing that in your role as a community manager. Now I think that's such a primary, super duper important role to the success that your role is now instrumental in sort of game development in a way that community management has always been like an afterthought until the past few years. And now it's no, you can't survive without it.
Yeah, seriously. That's a good point too. Yeah, and the community is often like your built-in audience for your next game because that's automatically going to be a group of people that will see the announcement like on the Discord or whatever. They're going to be like, "Okay, if I like the other one, I'll probably like this one." So there's already like a small group of people championing your next game launch, which again, like you need that big push when you're announcing something to get the word out there and start getting wish lists and start building up an audience of people that can recommend your games and be evangelists for you because I can't be everywhere all the time. I'm only one person. Your fans help with that immensely, for sure.
This is such an interesting discussion. Thanks again for joining us. I know we are over the 1 hour we booked with you, and I want to be
No,
respectful
that's
of
fine.
of
No, I
your
ramble
time.
sometimes too. So
I really
I
enjoyed our conversation today. But before we end, I wanted to see like anything you wanted to mention and we didn't talk about. Maybe the upcoming game that you didn't want to mention. Like anything
well,
you were thinking to talk about, or you wanted to highlight in this podcast that we didn't ask you about.
yeah, stay tuned. Definitely check out Kitfox Games if you've never heard of us before. We make some pretty awesome games, and we also publish some of the legendary games of yore, such as Dwarf Fortress and Caves of Cud. But yeah, we have a game in development called Loose Leaf, a T-Witch simulator. This is public knowledge. And then we're working on another secret game that you'll be hearing about very soon. But we're busy. We're very busy. We're doing all right. We're not in danger of closing, which is, I think, more than most people can say. It's a scary time. Community managers are scared from what I hear. It's just like talking to everyone's, I'm burnt out. I'm going from place to place. It's really hard to jump on a new game or an existing community, even if you're going from job to job and then suddenly you're in a new position. Because it takes a lot to catch up and learn about the community and jump into that role. And like having someone who's been around for a long time really helps, just like in any games role. Like when you lose these jobs and you lose these projects, you're losing like and that's why some of the best games these days are made by teams that stay on game after game and reiterate on things and make things better. And there's no way we can do that unless studios stop closing and people have time to make second games, third games, or updates to their existing games. Dwarf Fortress wouldn't be what it is if it hadn't been developed for literally 15, 20 years at this point. Like, it takes a long time to make games and make them really good. Yeah, I don't have any solutions for that, but that's a thing. Be nice to your community managers. It feels cathartic sometimes to type out things when you're frustrated. And trust me, like we understand when you're frustrated. We know that you're going to be frustrated before you even. We know we're going to put something out. We're like, they're going to be mad because of this and this. And I'm like, you're right every time, right? It's coming. So we know, trust me. And usually we're just the messenger. But also, I find it one of the most frustrating things about my job is that people don't understand how our company operates. And I don't feel like they should need to. But just because you assume something about a company doesn't mean it's true. For Kitfox, we make our games. Out of, I think, 14 employees, 3 people are working on the publishing side of things. But most of the time, like, all of Kitfox is not working on Dwarf Fortress. And there's really no easy way to go about explaining that, but just maybe don't assume. I don't know. Like, don't assume, like, labor. I don't know. It's weird, right? Like people think about a lot of things, but yeah, there's some things that like we're literally never going to be able to talk about like publicly. We can't be completely transparent about every little thing. Some things like confidential HR issues. If people are taking sick leave for whatever reason, we don't want to necessarily tell people that. It's maybe people aren't working at 100% capacity all the time, 24/7. I don't know. Just you have to realize that we're humans and not companies. I definitely understand when there's situations where you should see a company as a company, but sometimes they are just a group of people making a thing. And we don't have an army of lawyers at the ready. We are not that. Indie is weird, right? Indie is not a monolith. It's a confusing term. But yeah, I guess it's not two indie studios are the same. We're all different.
I,
I don't know. That was just like my PSA at the end. Not that like your audience wouldn't know. They're like, yeah, we get it. But yeah, that's just a general thing. It's probably not going to stop anyone, but I don't know.
just like cute way of ending this, but I really like this. Thanks again for your time, Alex.
It was a lot of fun.
Really enjoyed talking to you. Any final word, Jen?
No, thank you, Alex. It's been so great catching up. And I love your windy road and all the wonderful things that you did along the way and how even though you're in a spot where it wasn't where you originally thought you'd ever aim up, everything that you did as a side project or not, even if at the time you thought was a failure, led into building the skill sets that you're now like using now to find a job that really makes you happy at a studio that has a 4-day work week, which is that just sounds like the mecca.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
It's such
Yeah.
a happy
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You can check out our website at www.changinggamedevlife.com for summary notes, a full transcript, and related resources that are mentioned in this episode. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our Substack page or follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. We're very passionate about having these conversations with people who make the game industry better. Together, we can drive positive changes. If this episode resonated with you, make sure to share the podcast with your network and take a moment to rate us on whatever platform you use. Thank you.